Hello from Chicago. Today I'm going to share with you a reading technique that I use to amplify what I get out of every single book that I read. It might be something that you're already doing. In fact, I know it is. You might just not realize that you are doing it, or you might realize you're doing it, but you aren't harnessing its power. And I'm going to tell you what that technique is in a moment. But first, I want to invite to the video me from 2 weeks ago. It's negative something degrees today in Chicago and also beautifully sunny, blue sky. One of those cold sunny days. I'm a weirdo. I have to go outside every single day of my life, even if it's negative degrees. I think with the wind chill, it's negative 20. I think that's what I was told this morning. I don't look up the temperature in the winter because I just figure cold. It's gonna be cold. So I have to be told by members of my family how cold it is. So it's cold, but it's also sunny. Look at that blue sky. Come on. My enthusiasm for the blue sky, I think, took me a little too far, and now I can't feel my legs. And now I'd like to invite to the video me again from 1 week ago. And today it is 37 degrees and sunny, and it's still January, but honestly feels like spring, and I'm having a lot of trouble even filming without passing anyone because everybody is out and about walking around. That's part of living in Chicago. You get a 37 degree day after negative 20 wind chills and you go outside. Fellow Chicagoans and people from a similar climate, have you ever noticed that every single January we get like one surprise 45 degree day and everyone acts like it's summer? But then every June we get a similar 45 degree day, same temperature, 45, 50 degree day in June, and everyone acts like we now live in the Arctic. For those of you who have the pleasure of not living in Chicago, let me give you another couple examples. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to see in a normal, regularly lit room after you walk in from being in the bright sunshine? Or have you noticed how the ground seems to rock after you step onto land after being on a boat? Our experiences are always impacted by what came before. But the most obvious surface level impact on our experience of something, anything, always comes from what came just before. Like how a perfectly mild day feels freezing after a week of hot weather. So sometimes I wonder why book reviewers treat a book as if it exists in isolation, as if the reviewer hasn't read something just before that book and just after that book that might have completely impacted their experience of the book they're talking about. I can guess why a book reviewer, actually I know why a book reviewer focuses on one book in particular in a book review, and we'll get to that in a minute. But surely, just like I can feel the ghost of my wedding ring when I take my ring off my finger, the book I just read has left a ghostly residue on my brain as I open to page 1 of the next book I'm going to read. I recently read 2 books that made this even more crystal clear to me, but first, my family and I have a little experiment we want to share with you.
Okay, we're ready for our taste test.
We're going to do a little experiment, and hopefully this experiment is going to tell us something about reading books. So of course the experiment must be to eat chocolate.
That makes no sense. No sense.
And potato chips and
That makes no sense.
candy canes.
Okay, that still doesn't make sense.
Do you think that can tell us anything about reading books?
No.
Well, let's see. Let's give it a try. So,
Wait, hold on, I have an idea.
what's your idea?
So maybe what it is when you forced to eat it, or forced eat it, and when it tastes like after the second time you eat it.
Oh, that's interesting. So the second time you eat it? if it's different than the first time you eat it? What about what it's like compared to something else you ate right after it or right before it? What kind of chocolates do we have here? We have milk chocolate, Icelandic milk chocolate, dark chocolate with 56% dark, and we have 70% dark. So if we want to see how these taste all against each other, what order should we do this in? Should we do milk first?
It's still left. Oh wait, can I see it? Quanto and Z.
Are you ready?
Ready.
Wow. Very sweet. Whoa. Very sweet. Should we move all the way to the darkest chocolate or should we progress our way up?
Middle.
Okay, so what's this gonna taste like now that we've had really, really, really sweet milk chocolate? All right.
Kind of bitter.
Kind of bitter.
But also I feel like I taste a little orange in there too.
Fascinating. Ooh. That's
You
good.
taste the orange in there?
All right, everybody ready? All right, now we got the 70% dark. Okay, this is gonna be intense.
Oh, that is very dark.
That's the really dark one.
Now I want to see what this potato chip tastes like.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think before we do that, we should go back and try the milk again.
Whoa,
Or
that's
go,
gonna be.
or go in reverse order.
I think we should try the milk
No.
and see how sweet it is.
I want double piece.
No.
You're gonna be eating enough chocolate.
Everybody ready?
I can taste the orange even more now.
Doesn't even taste like chocolate.
I can even
It
taste
doesn't
milk.
even taste like chocolate. It doesn't even taste like chocolate. It just tastes sweet. All right, now what do? Now we got these
Chips.
salty
Sip
chips.
of water.
Sip of water.
You got a heart
I do.
shaped one.
Very salty.
Very salty
that
potato
tastes
chip.
a little more tasteless than it did when before I had the chocolate.
It tastes more. You had chips before chocolate.
Yes.
Experiment ruined.
I don't really taste any potato.
It's a chip, Daddy! You expect to taste potato?
I do expect potato chips to taste like potato.
And I actually do taste potato.
I taste potato. Or do you taste potato? All right, should we have the dark chocolate now? And see if it tastes sweet?
Yeah.
Sweeter than it did before? Because now we had something salty?
Try the dark.
Okay.
We are just having chocolate.
Okay. Here we go. Dark chocolate.
I think you forgot.
I would never forget you. All right, here we go.
I think that made it more bitter.
Really?
I would say it tastes a little sweeter.
Okay, now we should taste, now that we have the dark one, let's taste the medium dark.
I feel like
Whoa, sweet and not as enjoyable as it was against the milk chocolate for me. No,
Sweeter,
I liked it better.
but tastes less of chocolate.
Taste less of chocolate. Jeez. You're right. When you go down in chocolate content, you taste less chocolate.
Mom,
Lo and behold.
it knocked me out.
Okay. So, ooh. Does this taste saltier now?
I must
Chip.
try.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that
yeah,
tastes
yeah.
really salty. Okay, so
We just made potato chips better.
I think I've eaten all I can eat. But I think we have some important findings. When you go up, you start with less chocolate content and you go up immediately, you taste, it's more enjoyable. You taste more of the chocolate. But if you go down, like down in chocolate content, it starts to taste more bland. Like there's not as much flavor and complexity in comparison when you have the really intense chocolate content.
Just throw milk chocolate.
Rude.
Saltier after the milk chocolate.
Saltier after the milk chocolate.
Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
I'm gonna have to take your word for it because I might die if I have more chocolate. All right.
Yeah, I might die after the dark chocolate
got-
or the medium chocolate.
We're opening up a peppermint candy cane.
Okay.
Okay. Now taste your water. Okay, sip of water. All right, now take a peppermint.
Give me Peppa Pig.
You got your peppermint? All right,
Taste your
sip of
water.
water. Does it taste colder?
Yes.
Whoa! Does it taste colder to you too, little monkey?
It froze me solid.
It froze him solid. And there we have it, folks. Room temperature water turns cold after eating peppermint. What do you think this says about reading?
No. It's not the same after you read it.
It's not the same after you read it. Don't eat chocolate before you read a book. That's not right. So that little experiment was just my fun way of showing how life is full of contrasts and comparisons that impact what we think are unique experiences, and this is true in our reading life as well. I recently read these two amazing books. Both were nominated by their publishers for the Republic of Consciousness Prize for the US and Canada. Neither of them made it to the long list, but they certainly deserve to be there in my opinion because I loved both of these books. This is Us Fools by Nora Lange, and it's published by $2 Radio. And this is The Lodgers by Holly Pester, and it is published by Assembly Press. So Us Fools is about two sisters, Jo and Bernie. It's narrated by Bernie, and Jo and Bernie grow up in 1980s Illinois. They live on a farm with their parents, and they are very much struggling to make ends meet. They are outcasts in their community. The sisters are really left to themselves, to fend for themselves by their very quirky parents. And so these two sisters are in charge of their own education. They're homeschooled, they're in charge of educating themselves, and they educate themselves quite well, but quite idiosyncratically, I would say. Jo is, across the novel, increasingly unhinged, and we see Bernie as the narrator as she tries to hold the family together. And at some point in the novel, they are struggling so much to make ends meet because this is the farm crisis in the 80s, and in the early 90s, they have to leave their farm and they move to Chicago. And the story then continues on from there. They move when Jo and Bernie are in middle school, high school, and you follow them up until young adulthood, probably in their 20s and 30s. And again, Bernie is just continuing to try to hold everything together as Jo and frankly their parents as well become increasingly unhinged. And then The Lodgers is also narrated by a young adult woman. This takes place in the UK. It specifically starts out in a small town in Britain, and it follows a narrator who similarly has a life in a small town where she and her mother are very much outcasts. Her mother seems to be fairly unhinged, and this narrator tries to hold things together. The narrator now, as an adult, spends her life trying to escape her mother and her childhood, but is continuously drawn back. She finds gig employment and kind of these random educational opportunities and makes her way through various temporary housing arrangements, from lodging with families to sublets to sleeping on the couches of friends. The book opens, she's just returned to the town. She's in a sublet in the town she grew up in, and she's trying to get up the courage to go see her mother. And that narration alternates with other chapters that are addressed to you, and you quickly realize that it's the narrator who is imagining the life of the woman who has moved into the lodging situation that the narrator has just left. So the narrator was renting a room from a single mom and living with the single mom and her little girl. Was only allowed to be in that room from Monday through Friday and only at night. She had to leave during the day. So now she is left and is imagining the life of the woman who has moved into that house next with the mother and the daughter. And it's super unique and wonderful. So reading these two books back to back created this amazing conversation in my head, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But there is a belief, I think, out there, whether it's explicitly stated or not, just implied through how we talk about books, that every book should be evaluated on its own merits, like what exists within the two covers, right? Independent of circumstantial factors like what order did you read your books that year. So a book's artistic and literary merit is inherent and not dependent on external factors necessarily. When we're reading a book review about one book, we might see some mentions of other influences or other similar books, but really the book review is about that one book. And also, practically speaking, if somebody is looking for book recommendations, it's much easier to search book reviews if they're about a single book. So practically, it makes complete sense that our book reviews are generally about a book. But I never read books in isolation, and neither do you. And I get so much joy out of thinking about how the books I read are having conversations with one another. And of course, every book we've ever read lives somewhere within our brains. So every book I've ever read has impacted my reading as I continue to read throughout my life. So all of these books are having conversations in our heads, but I would argue that the best and most delightful conversations come from those books that just so happen to sit right next to each other in your brain. So my experience of these two books would have been completely different if I had read them at different times and next to different books. Completely different. I am convinced that I love these books so much more because of how I thought about them together. I'll give you a few examples. So first of all is tone and pace and style between these two books. They are completely different. Completely different. This is like a battering ram of information and events and details, and it mirrors the intense brain activity of the characters in this family who are just highly intelligent but also highly quirky, and it is just a battering ram of just constant historical facts and things happening in the family just constantly. It's also like really rather dense with information compared to this book, which, because I read it right after I read Us Fools, it felt so stripped bare, like more so than I think it would have if I had read a like stripped bare book right before it. It felt so much more stripped down because I had just been like drinking from the fire hose. So this, because this was so intense, starting this book actually felt a lot like the opening scene of this book. Like its tone and pace were so perfectly paired to what actually was the opening scene. So the opening scene is the narrator going into her sublet for the first time alone, and she's kind of able to poke around this space by herself. So it's somebody else's space, but she's there alone. And so there's this quiet, like peeking about nature to it. She's poking around, but there's nobody there, so she can poke around. And it's exactly what it felt like reading. Like I was coming into this quiet space and I was given space to kind of alone, like poke around and just kind of, there's nothing being shoved down my throat right from the get-go. There's not like an intense level of detail. I'm just kind of opening the door into this empty space and poking around. And because the characters in this book are so intense and just so alive and real and just full of detail, the characters in this book felt very impressionistic. They felt very much like a soft watercolor painting. It's just like you're getting a whiff of a character, but like the perfect whiff, like a good whiff, like a whiff of like an amazing perfume or like baking cookies or something. Like it's a good whiff, but it's just a whiff. But despite their formal differences, these shared an intense number of themes. And I think the fact that they were right next to each other in my brain made me appreciate the themes in each of them all the more. So both are about a dysfunctional, offbeat family with parents who have questionable parenting practices and children who are living with the consequences of that, trying to find a place for themselves in the world after having the childhood that they had. Very much both about narrators that are trying to escape, especially like one particular member of the family, but feeling constantly drawn back to that person like a magnet. Both, they have different endings, but because that's kind of the trajectory of both of these characters, the endings feel compatible, because these characters are both trying to break free from a particular family member. These are both very much about class, about housing, insecure housing, about space and place and what you can call your own in your space. Ownership very much is a big theme in these two books. There's also a shared setting and theme of real America, like real rural America, like the real America versus, the America you see on TV, urban America versus like, here's what people are actually living through and what life is like. And this is very much about real, there's even a sentence in here about how the town that she's from is real Britain. It's real Britain. This is what Britain is. Even though the narration style and the narrators are so very different in terms of style and language, because they're both about young women who are mostly talking about themselves in relation to another young woman. So in Us Fools, it's Bernie is talking about herself in relation to Joe. In The Lodgers, the narrator is talking about herself in relation to this other young woman who's moved into the lodging situation. They have really cool similarities in that they'll talk about like, we did this, we did that, but then that we, talking about two women, we splits, like even with it sometimes within the same sentence, into two experiences. So they start as a unit, we, and then they split into like, well, but then I would do this and then you would do that. And then you thought this and I thought that. And so you see like, even at the sentence level, this thinking of their experience as one, but ultimately fighting for that independence. I really struggled through a lot of Us Fools. There were like a lot of non sequiturs and just it was an intensity that I don't think I was prepared for. By the end, I was invested and in love, but I think I enjoyed it more because then I picked up The Lodgers and I was madly in love with The Lodgers from page 1. But it kept Us Fools alive in my brain. And so I just fell even more and more and more in love with this book as I went along with this one. The pairing of these two was not intentional. Everything that I felt was in conversation with each other was purely serendipity. And I think sometimes, this way I have of thinking about books that I read right after each other, it doesn't always work out so perfectly. But still, I feel like there is an impact from one book to another that's worth exploring. And I was talking about this with my husband, and he brought up something that I hadn't really thought about. And he mentioned that when he has read a book that he really, really loves, he really struggles to figure out what he's going to read next because he thinks that it's going to pale by comparison, and he wants to give the next book its best shot. So he'll often reread something like an old favorite, and I thought that was an interesting technique. I tend not to worry about that, but I can see how one would worry that after you read something really fabulous, the next book will have less of a chance at winning you over, I guess. Like footprints in the sand or the butt imprint you make just after standing up from being on the couch. These imprints are most distinct just after they're made, and they start to fade over time. So proximity is important here. Proximity and adjacency is important. And this is something we see used within literature all the time. There are all sorts of devices, literary devices, that rely on proximity of the literary tool or the element. So juxtaposition. Juxtaposition uses contrast to create meaning. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It's placing two things side by side in order to create or enhance a comparison or a contrast. You can do this with characters too in the form of a foil. So like in Cinderella seems all the more good because she has evil stepsisters who interact with her. So that would be like a character foil. On the other hand, you have a literary device like alliteration, which also uses proximity of elements to create an effect within the text. But in that instance, it's using something that is the same. So it's using the consonant sound at the beginning of words. And those in proximity to one another create a certain literary effect as desired by the writer. So similar to these literary techniques that use proximity and adjacency to enhance the effect of something, we can use proximity and adjacency of our reading to enhance our books for ourselves. And we can either do this on purpose, like you can go out and you can read these two books back to back because I've told you about them, or you can just rely on serendipity and just think about the books you read in conversation with one another, the books you've just read. All you need to do is open yourself up to the conversation that your books are having. And so I have some questions here that I came up with that could help that I think I tend to think about just naturally as I'm reading the books that I'm reading. You can do this, you know, without really overtly having questions in front of you, or you could actually have a set of questions for yourself. So I came up with a few that I thought were kind of fun, and I have them in like 2 different categories. So the first is contrast and comparison effects. So that like, which is similar to like how the water tastes colder after eating a peppermint. For example, is your reading pace influenced by your last book's rhythm? Is your attention span either stretched or contracted by what you just read? Did you struggle with the last book? Is that making the next book feel even more like a breeze? Or vice versa? How is the prose of the last book impacting how you are reading this book? Are you moving from a really ornate style to something really simple? And does that feel refreshing, or does it feel disappointing? Like disappointingly plain? How does a book with a really large cast of characters make an intimate, like 2-person, 3-person story feel? Does it feel claustrophobic, or does it feel like really beautifully focused? Does a book with an experimental structure change the impact of a book with a more traditional way of storytelling? Does the like a more traditional style feel comforting and familiar then right up next to an experimental book? Or does it feel like boring and conventional? The second category of questions is what I'm calling the cushion effect, which is the imprint that your butt leaves on a couch cushion after you stand up, and the imprint stays for a little while after you've been standing. So similarly, our book butts leave imprints in our brain, in our brain cushion. So is the emotional residue of your last book still warm and present as you're reading the next one? Do you notice related ideas that you might have otherwise missed? Do shared themes jump out more vividly? Do different approaches to the same theme become more apparent? Do characters from your last book feel like people who've just left the room? Can you still smell their perfume in the room when you're meeting a new set of characters? And what does this do to your impression of the new set of characters? Are the questions and ideas raised by your last book still actively percolating as you're reading your next book? And again, you can purposefully plan out your reading to make, and I know lots of us do that, pair certain themes or settings or style of prose together. And I know that there are plenty of reviews and essays out there that do just this. They think about books together, like in conversation with one another. But I think that we can do more. We can incorporate this into our reading life. And I think for me, it greatly enhances my experience of every book to bring them together in conversation with one another. And my preferred method is to take advantage of serendipity. I kind of just like to read books and see what I notice. And I find that to be more delightful, to just be there to notice the conversations that these books are having with one another. So that's my technique, to have the books that are sitting right next to each other in the cafe that is your brain, have a conversation with one another and eavesdrop and see what you can learn from it. It's super fun. Let me know if you already do this. You probably do. But hey, I figured it was worth sharing anyway. My name is Sarah. If you didn't notice, these are both from small independent publishers, and that's what I talk about on this channel. So if you're interested in that, I highly encourage you to check out other videos and stick around. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.